Psst. Hey, buddy.
Me?
Yeah, you. You want to buy a record?
Oh, do I? But will I get in trouble?
And welcome once again to Two Guys Talking About Records, of Vinyl Community Podcast. Hold on, let me take my disguise back off. Every week where we two guys get together and, well, we talk about records. My name's Jim, and I am an on the up and up record store owner.
Well, I didn't recognize you there at first, Jim. You. Wow.
Hey, Steve.
And I'm Steve, and I'm one of those record collectors that have illegal stuff.
Oh, no. Well, we are finally getting around to talking about bootlegs, unofficial records, counterfeit records, you name it. They're known by many, many names. I think Discogs just rounds it up and calls them all unofficial. But we'll delve into that a little bit today on the podcast. It's a touchy subject for some people, I think, isn't it?
It is. Some love them, and others go, "Well, that's not right."
Yeah.
Especially if you're an artist.
Oh, especially, and we know artists, and so we're all about respecting them. But I don't know, where does this stand when you get in between artists and or major corporations?
Yes.
Oh, let's try not to get too deep on that today.
Yep.
But anyhow, that discussion is coming up. It's been a couple of weeks in the brewing, but I think our technical issues have been ironed out. Hopefully, I'm knocking on wood.
Yeah.
So we'll go from there. Everything going well out there?
One more week till Memorial Day. It's Christmas season for the pool. For the pool boy, it's Christmas time. So it's just 7 days a week, except when you take enough time to do a podcast.
And your videos and the Steve Carlson channel. I saw the first official full one from the new record. Well, the second official full one from the record room, right?
Yep. Last night I'm working on the closet to kind of clean up more clutter, and I got to it's just the decorating part. But I got the rest of the house. I also have to put up pictures and crap. So it's just been hard right now. I'm just not home to do a lot.
Well, priorities. Come on.
Yeah. I guess
that record room. Well, speaking of filling the record room, the pickups continue. Mine's a little slower this week, but you got some goodies, correct?
I did. I actually had a lot come in. I'm only going to show some of it, and we'll save some more because Radio Wasteland sent me some heat. I mean, we're talking smoking hot heat.
I'm glad I was following that tracking. I'm glad that showed up okay for you.
Yeah, and I had someone send me some VCLT. So, but we'll go with some of this. What I got here. Then the first is, and I got this from Jim. Radio Wasteland, Type O Negative, Bloody Kisses, which I bought this CD when it came out, and it was phenomenal. This is the Record Store Day reissue, as you can see by the nice green tag on there from 2018. But
big trifold.
Yeah, trifold. It's colored vinyl on there. It's this is such a good album. I never became a huge Type O Negative. To me, this was their best album. This is the one I want. I really don't need anything else from them. Of course, the group disbanded. Their lead singer, I think, died in 2010 of some type of illness. But super, very excited to get this thing in.
I should point out too that that one in particular, you didn't get any preferential treatment. That one hit one of the video drops on our regular Friday drops, and you caught it and said, "Hey."
Yes.
Hey. So
yes. Luckily there's a lot of stuff that gets dropped that there aren't too many people that really get interested in it, except for me.
Well, I'm happy to be there for you regardless. So what else? You got a couple of other goodies, right? That was a big package that went your way.
I had this thing come in. So good luck on finding this one to put on Spotify. And it's called Virgin Traffic Sound. And this Virgin is a group from Peru, late 60s, early 70s, kind of psych rock with Latin tinges in it. And I'd seen this on someone else's channel, and it got me interested because I love South American garage and psych rock. They really, because again, that Latin that Latin feel always pops into it. So this is a new reissue that has come out this year, and really, yeah, pretty excited to get this thing. Sounds great. Uh,
Very cool.
yeah, it's kind of not as way out there spacey, but still definitely some fuzz in that going on. And then we had just got this in. And I saw you had this come in the store. I didn't know if you'd be getting that or not. And it's the new
Yep.
Ben Folds. Ben Folds' second album. I bought the CDs when they came out. The first CD I bought, I really liked it. And I became a big Ben Folds fan. And I had all his stuff on CD and finally a few albums. So I was happy to see this reissued. It had his big hit Brick was on here. So exciting to have that. And I love his piano playing. This was when he had the group Ben Folds Fives. Eventually, he just became Ben Folds, especially within the aughts. And he put out a couple really amazing albums then. That to get them on vinyl, I mean, we're talking triple digits.
Oh yeah, heck yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, that was a brand new reissue this past week. So yeah, we do have one here in the store, I believe.
yes, you did. You showed that. Go, oh, I just got that one. Nice thing is, if you order from Amazon, it comes so fast here because they got a big warehouse right in town.
Oh
So,
man,
like,
just walk
oh,
over and stand outside.
that's right. Yeah, I'm here to pick up my order for today.
Save trouble.
Kind of like I do at pool stores. I order, I just go there. Hey, I'm here to pick up. So those. Oh, well, let's do this one here. This is another one. There's a series going on in the VC dealing with acid archives. It's a book called Acid Archives, which I do own, and one of them showed this one, and it's group's called Heather Black, and this is their self-titled album. Kind of a cool looking label there. Um, and the sample he played, I really, really liked is Chris Kibler, but some of it's kind of more folky. So the side two had the faster stuff, a little bit harder. So I'm listening to side one and go, well, this album kind of sucks. But then I flipped over to six. Oh, there's the music he was playing. I really liked it. So something different. I think this came out around 70, 71 of crazy Cajun music, but there's nothing Cajun about it. So yeah, I don't know if you'll find that one either, Jim. But
Well,
yeah.
it's worth mentioning again too for those that are curious. We don't include the sound samples because of copyright constraints and issues. We like to play nice, except when we talk about bootlegs in a minute. But so look for the playlist. We'll create a Spotify playlist of most of the things that we talk about, so you can hear the samples. And if that's on there, Steve, I'll put it in the playlist. I'm curious to hear what that is too. Some of
Yeah.
that early psych, man, they really varied. You can tell that was an experimental era where there was still a lot of folk influences coming off the likes of Dylan, but they're trying to be psychedelic rock. And then you venture off into prog a little bit, and then the garage psych. There's so many different veins of that makes it interesting.
It is. It really goes all over. And I never really got into the folk psych, still not into that much. And the prog type of psych, but garage, you give me some garage, I'm all in, man.
You're on it.
Yeah. Well, what about you, Jim? What's your week like?
Light week. In fact, this was a late ad. I almost had nothing other than the two Rush ones I'm going to show you, but this popped into the store yesterday, and I have had copies of this in the store for sale, listened to it, and I enjoyed it. And the last time it came in, it's not the originals. The originals are tough, but it was a good reissue, and I played it a couple times. I thought I'm going to keep it, and then I left the price tag on it. Somebody heard it while I was playing it and picked it up off the shelf. But yesterday we had another copy of Air and Moon Safari, but this one's Air French Band, according to Discogs. What makes this one kind of cool is the fact that this is the Vinyl Me Please edition from a few years back. So it's one of the VMP essentials. So it comes with a lot of cool stuff. It's got the insert as well as the art print in there, and you got the side there, and it is on colored vinyl as well. I forget they call this like a bluish one, but it's a very neat thing. I'm not overly familiar with these guys other than just listening to them a little bit, and I kind of dig it, and then I don't. The instrumental stuff is great, and then when you start getting some of the vocal stuff in there, it's like, what am I listening to? Discogs calls this. This, by the way, was a 2023, so just last year reissue from VMP. Discogs, the main genre is electronic, and then the style they break down is future jazz, down tempo, synth pop.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
I would agree. I love that album. I adore that album. Air put out a couple. Their first couple albums were incredible. So I'm all in. But I did get that from Vinyl Me Please. Otherwise,
Okay.
I'd be self. Right now, you just see drool coming down. Oh my god.
They call this the Blue Turquoise Galaxy Sea of Tranquility colored vinyl.
Well, that's a whole album title alone.
It's in and of itself. Now, the
Yeah.
other two, I've had this for a couple of weeks, but I had a couple copies in the store, and this leads into our discussion of bootlegs. This was a recently reissued Rush unofficial, but bootleg. It's called Georgia, the 2002 broadcast, Volume 1. And then, of course, because they're trying to cat all of this in,
Mm.
Volume 2. So each of these are 2 record sets. And it is a Rush performance, of course, from the year 2002. But this one's kind of it's a very interesting one. Let me call up my camera here so we can see this a little bit better. It's an interesting and historical one for Rush fans, and the inside looks pretty cool because this was following the 5-year hiatus that Rush took after drummer Neil Peart lost his daughter in a car accident, and then 13 months later, I believe, lost his wife to cancer. And so at that point, the band just said, we're done. Neil said, I'm done. I need to take some time. He actually went on a continental road trip on his motorcycle and drove from Canada all the way across Canada, all the way up Alaska to the top of Alaska, and then all the way down into Mexico and around and back, just to kind of get his bearings. And after 5 years, the trip didn't take 5 years, but after 5 years, he decided that, yes, I'm ready to go back. And this was one of their first shows from the tour that kicked in. So this 4-album set between Volume 1 and Volume 2 covers the entire performance. In fact, the liner notes inside say on October 13th, 2002, Rush put on an extraordinary show at the Phillips Arena in Atlanta, Georgia. The performance was recorded for a live FM radio broadcast and is featured in its entirety on this double LP set. Actually, double LP set. So 4 albums altogether. So the sound quality on this is excellent. It has disappeared from my distributor, so I think it was really kind of a tremendously limited run between these two. So I'm happy to get these, but this again dovetails directly into our discussion on bootlegs. And if you're finding things that are, let's say, radio broadcasts, the chances are that it's going to be a little bit more, a little bit better quality, I think, than some of the other what you'd think of bootlegs from the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, definitely.
So therein lies our discussion, Steve. Bootleg or unofficial records. We mentioned that Discogs calls these unofficial. It's their umbrella term for things. And more commonly, they're referred to as bootlegs. And in the case of this Rush and some of the other ones we'll talk about today, I guess this could be considered a bootleg because it's not an official release of a live concert. And Rush has got a ton of live music out there, but there's been a ton of stuff recorded for Rush throughout the years. And I'll show off some of my Rush bootlegs. Yeah, your Sunday video this morning surmised. I wonder if Jim has any Rush bootlegs. Yes.
What's interesting
yes.
when you look at Discogs on these, some they put prices on, some say, no, we don't put prices on it.
Yep. And that's not, I do want to circle back to this a little bit too. And that's because Discogs policy is that they will not allow unofficial copies of items for sale on the marketplace. Yeah. And when you see a price attached to it, that means it just hasn't been caught yet. They haven't determined whether or not, and that comes down to the person who submitted it. Let's say that somebody submits it to Discogs and they don't, well, there's one of two things. Either they don't know it's an unofficial copy, or they purposely leave that unofficial copy off of there in order to get it to trigger into Discogs. And then after a week or two, maybe a month or two, Discogs algorithm or somebody within the admins catch it and they say, hey, this is an unofficial. They'll add the tag and then it's gone from the marketplace. It's no longer allowed to be sold. But I want to come back to that. I want to talk about a little bit about that down the line. But the history of bootlegs, we did some research on this. It predates audio recordings, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I would
That's
never have known that William Shakespeare was among the first of the artists to be bootlegged, I guess.
makes sense. Back then, hey, you know what? Hey, you want to buy a Shakespeare book?
Yeah, and it's basically they would just say, well, let's transcribe one of his plays. And I don't think that there was really the idea of an item being copyrighted or something being copyrighted. It was just, hey, this is a great play. Let me write down what it says, and we'll get it off to other places so they can enjoy it too. And if William Shakespeare gets credit for it, then more the best.
Yeah.
Then there's somebody else saying, hey, guess what I just wrote?
You know,
I was
yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say I was surprised but not shocked, I guess, to realize that the idea, the concept of creating unofficial copies goes back that far.
Yeah. When we think of the audio, what I had found was the very first audio was in 1901 by a guy named Lionel Mapleson. And he was the librarian at the Metropolitan Opera Museum. So in 1901, he had this homemade recording machine. And so he went in and recorded an opera on there and then put it out on whatever they were using, little wax cylinders. I don't know. But he did over 100 bootlegs of opera, and they say they're all terrible quality because you can imagine 1901, what kind of recording, a little,
Yeah.
I don't know, how big is that tape recorder you bring in to try to copy this stuff?
I
But
would think in that era they would be wired. They used to be able to record on actual wires, and that would be
okay,
the recording in some
yeah,
cases. It predates tape, obviously, so
yep,
it was either a wax cylinder or more likely the wire recording. But
sure.
yeah, but you think about that. I mean, I want to share this performance with the world. That guy probably has descendants that went to dead shows.
Yeah. So, well, there you go. Opera was the first.
So, but bootlegging means, I mean, you think of the term, it goes back to the Prohibition era, where you're doing
Mhm.
something illegal. You're bottling up whiskey or beer and selling it because it's against the law. We're bootleggers in this case, and that term kind of carried over into the recording industry and more, I think, more prominently as rock and roll came into it, and record companies decided that they were going to do this, and this, but they weren't going to do this. And I think one of the obviously it existed, but I think one of the biggest catalysts of bootlegging, not so much Elvis, and there's obviously Elvis bootlegs out there, but there was just so much Elvis that the major labels and RCA had such a hold on it. But I think one of the biggest catalysts was the Beatles in
Mhm.
1963 and 64 kicking out. And I showed that off, as I was trying to sell you that bootleg to start with. One of the most, and we're going to not use the term bootleg for the time being, and you go back to the term counterfeit,
Okay.
because in this case, the Beatles hit so hard and so fast that you had unscrupulous characters, if you will, trying to jump on the bandwagon. This wasn't a matter of trying to share the music like bootleggers into the 70s would be with live shows from the Grateful Dead and anybody else. This was basically just some other people saying, man, the Beatles are making millions. How can I get myself a piece of that
Yeah.
pie? So in that respect, I can say, okay, man, this is really not on the up and up. But introducing the Beatles, this, I think, and doing some research, and whenever one of these comes into the store, by the way, it's a difficult time because this is so time consuming to figure out whether this is one of the few, and I think it's like 30 some odd releases that are legitimate VJ releases of introducing the Beatles, or if it's one of the hundreds of counterfeit.
Wow.
Let me call this up here real quick. We have one of the websites, obviously Discogs helps with this, but this particular website, it's the rarebeatles.com, has an entire page devoted to what they say is the world's most counterfeited album. Um, the text in here, if you can't read it, it says it seems at almost every copy of this album turns up is a fake, and that's due to the fact that several different companies in the 60s and throughout the 70s manufactured an endless array of different counterfeit versions. Add to that the more than 30 different authentic versions that VJ managed to produce in 63 and 64. Then you have a complicated situation for collectors and historians. More variations of this album exist than perhaps any other record issued. I don't know about that anymore, to tell you the truth. But this page goes on And if you really want to dig deep, Steve, here's you look at ways to tell the difference in the VJ versions of the mono covers, the stereo covers, and then you get into mono version 1, version 2, version 3. This just goes on, and it gives you some history of the counterfeiting and how you go about detecting. And this, as I said before, this is probably one of the more difficult ones to add into, to try to get to. Now, this particular one that I found, this is in our store stock, or will be soon, is a real copy. Discogs actually has their main page, their main entry page for this album. Let me call this one back up here. The album under the Discogs, in case you're going to go looking, is under Please Please Me. And once you get into that, they've got some info on how to tell some of the differences. But they also say, here is the dead sure, or the quickest method to determine whether or not you have a real VJ copy of Introducing the Beatles or one of the hundreds of fakes. The title and artist are separated on the label. It's a counterfeit. If the stereo has Love Me Do on the back cover, some of the easiest method by cover, if George casts a shadow. And this is what I tend to do when I'm looking at this too, is if you look at this, let me get mine up in here. If you can see the shadow along this side, then that is most likely a real version of this, and whether or not Paul's hand, because when the Photoshop didn't exist in the 60s, so they literally had to take this picture, make a copy of it, and then cut it out, and then paste the picture onto a new piece to make the new print.
Oh, wow.
And oftentimes what would happen when they would do that, they would cut off portions of Paul's hand. Obviously, they'd lose the gradient of George's shadow. Sure. And other actions and things in the back. So, for example, I've got another one to show you here. This one is from the personal collection, and it's a stereo. So right off the bat, it already looks a little bit different. But this one I have determined through Discogs is a counterfeit, even though it has George's shadow. Discogs calls this particular release very problematic because it's hard to tell. But if you look at the two differences, Paul's hand is pretty much cut off on this. Okay. So this is it's really kind of it's such a pain in the ass. It seems like to go through and determine which of these are which. And just to make matters worse, I've got one more copy in the upcoming stock that I haven't attempted to do yet. It is a VJ that has the colored label around the end. It's got the shadow and Paul's full hand. So my guess is it's real. So I don't know. Would you consider this the most counterfeited album of all time?
Well, it sure sounds like it now. Bob Dylan, I thought he had a lot of them, at the very start, as people were trying to do his, but that's kind of crazy. If I had it, I'd just say, it's an original, I'm good, and I'm not going to bother.
Yep. So if you have a copy of that, and I know a lot of people think that a lot of early Beatles are worth a lot, and some of it is. And if you can find a true original VJ copy of Introducing the Beatles that's not a counterfeit, I mean, it can vary. Usually about the $20 range, $15 to $20 range, depending upon the quality. And the quality of these are rarely, and I mean rarely, they're in good condition. The two that I've got here, you can barely see. You can't see it on here, but this thing looks like it was used as a doormat.
Yeah, no one pulled those off the turntable. We better put that back in the record sleeve right now. Yeah, it wasn't happening.
We'll keep that. So the idea of counterfeit, again, separating it from the terminology of a bootleg, means that someone's trying to cash in. They're making an illegal copy of an album just simply to cash in on this. I mean, Taylor Swift, I'm seeing this nowadays. She's so popular that there are counterfeit versions of her albums showing up out there already. It's just has to do with the popularity. You mentioned Dylan, but what were some of the other big ones counterfeit wise that you ran across?
Well, as I would say Grateful Dead, but they've embraced it and they're actually putting them out.
Yep. Well, that's the bootleg side of things.
Yeah,
that's the recording of a live concert.
Yeah. Oh, as far as the counterfeit side.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I never even went. I'm trying to think.
I mean, there are some big ones out there as well.
Yeah.
And I've run across one of the ones that more recently comes to mind for me. And this gets back into the ethics. If we want to start talking ethics of counterfeits, I think it's a better argument to say that it's unethical to have and or sell a counterfeit than it would be for a live bootleg recording. But the band Cake, let's take those guys for
Oh,
example.
yeah.
They only recently started reissuing Cake albums officially on vinyl, and for the longest time you couldn't. And there was a couple of Cake albums, I forget which one it was, but that was only available as a counterfeit and unofficial. And through one of our sources, I got a copy, and I got a couple for the store. But when Cake got around to officially reissuing those on vinyl officially, I gave up the bootleg and went with the official and bought that for myself. So
Well, you know,
does that
it
make me?
doesn't this come down to copyright laws? So you think Europe
Oh
has
yeah,
a lot less copyright. So out there, maybe they're not. Hey, it's we can do this. They're still counterfeit, but they're allowed. But here, hey, you're not supposed to.
and you're not. And Europe does have copyright laws, but I think a lot of it, especially with the live bootlegs too, that changes. We'll get to that in a couple of minutes. But the idea that a U.S. based corporation or even a smaller label, for example, or an independent label, it's probably not as much. It's not worth the effort to go after a lot of these European. Whereas let's say that I were to take an album that I know is out of print and scrape together a couple $1,000s, make a good digital copy of it, take that copy to a pressing plant that I doubt you'd find a pressing plant that would do it for you, but let's just say you found somebody that would press it. I guarantee you that I would be sued almost instantly because I'm US based.
Yeah,
Whereas they're going to say, you know what, I'm not going to bother going after the Czechoslovakian bootlegger because why bother? Just let
yeah.
it go.
I say between the Czech Republic and Russia,
Yeah.
there's
Oh
there's
yeah.
enough of these counterfeit ones coming out.
Yeah. Now, and one other counterfeit I wanted to mention. Then this showed up, and I don't have that site called up currently. And this one for me kind of bridges the gap between a counterfeit album and a bootleg. And this is it's really tough to kind of tell what this is. It just says comeback on here,
Yeah,
and once you do some research into it, the labels don't help you at all. There's absolutely no information on the cover or the back. You have to go through the dead wax run out and call it up. But this has been identified as a Beatles counterfeit.
hmm,
And what it is it's the demo sessions from, I believe, Let It Be. So the story on this is that this is being referred to as the first bootleg album from the Beatles, not from the Beatles, but involving the Beatles, released in 1970. It's an early version of what would become the album Let It Be. Now, this bootleg, if you will, was sourced from a tape recording of an acetate, which is a form of vinyl recording, which was prepared by the band's engineer. It's one of the earliest commercial rock and roll bootlegs, or unofficial in this case. The first being The Great White Wonder, as you mentioned, by Bob Dylan. So if you've seen that Peter Jackson documentary, you know that this was kind of a problematic time for the Beatles, and that's where this was kind of born out of as well. But in early March of '69, Lennon and McCartney asked the engineer to assemble an album from the tapes that they had been working on. And he came up with this idea for a fly on the wall, selecting several of the early rehearsal takes for some songs in the album. The engineer completed mixing and assembly of the album to be titled Get Back in May of '69. That album was scheduled for release in July, but with their next album, Abbey Road, already underway, the accompanying film that they were working on, this was pushed back until December. So the info that I was able to find on this goes on to say that it was rumored at the time that Lennon had given the acetate or tape copy to a reporter who in turn gave it to a disc jockey. Lennon later said that they came from an acetate that I gave to someone, and then they went and broadcast it as being an advanced pressing for something. So in Boston, WBCN was one of the first radio stations to air the recording. The station obtained a reel-to-reel copy of the engineer's acetate and then broadcast in its entirety in September of '69. And so a recording of that broadcast then went on to become the source material for the bootleg of Come Back, which is not quite the album, but different versions. So,
okay,
man, this is a sordid history for this one.
yeah.
But that shows up as one of the earliest and strangest, I think, stories for bootlegs.
Hmm. Yeah.
So let's move from the idea of the counterfeit to the actual live show bootlegging. And I think that this really took place. You start hearing this in the late '60s. I've got a Jefferson Airplane bootleg of Alive in there. The Grateful Dead, as you mentioned, were were big, and they almost really began to embrace the audience recordings that people would trade on, reel to reels, and then later cassettes, and then later, digital files and CDs of that. But live bootlegs are a thing too. They're different than the counterfeits, but they're a lot more fun because it's a picture of a piece of history, a time in history.
It is. And when I think of bootleg, especially growing up 70s, 80s, there was just this cool factor about bootlegs. Here you had something that really was sold a lot of times underneath the table or only at record shows. You would never find them in the rack, where now you will find them in the racks.
Yep.
And so when you had something like that, like at the intro, am I going to get arrested for this? Am I, as a copyright police? We didn't know, it's like, you're not supposed to have this. So it made your collection like super cool. So, you would be looking for bootlegs. The problem is a lot of them sound like crap.
Yep.
I mean, the drums were wrong. They would be, yeah. But Led Zeppelin was huge, huge bootleg. I have happened with them. There's a guy I know in Boston. His name's Rob, and he's a Led Zeppelin fan, and he just has hundreds of Zeppelin bootlegs on album. I have a few. The thing is, at the flood, they wiped out the album jackets, but it's a bootleg. All I need to do is make a photocopy and stick it right on there, and I got an official bootleg.
There you go.
That's all it was, for a lot of these. But here, this is live at Olympic. That one's not the bootleg. That one's not the bootleg. This one, live bootleg. I don't even have where it was at on here, but the label. Isn't that an awesome label? It's a concert. and the quality's not that great. It's kind of like that label. It's missing some stuff. But hey, this is like the label too.
Well, so much of the audio, you talk about the quality, so much of the audio from these early bootlegs came from audience recordings. Somebody had a tape recorder or reel to reel. Sometimes there's soundboard where the soundboard that's in the crowd where they can and mix the live show has a feed coming off of it, which is not going to be a good mix down feed, but still it's better than an audience recording. And I've heard some really crappy audience.
It is like this one is kind of an audience recording. A number of Pink Floyd ones.
Yep.
Audience recording. And they're actually almost kind of get you upset because there's too much other crap going on. This one wasn't too bad. World Records, and it was a 2-album set of a bootleg. And again, I don't have the date on this thing. Just black vinyl, obviously. But the recording on this isn't too bad. Drums again come off a little harsh, and don't really hear the bass as well. But Robert Plant's singing's good. Jimmy Page, his voices are pretty good. So those not bad. I had a few other Zeppelin bootlegs because that was really what that was the exciting group to look for in the 80s, going to record stores. Can I get a Zeppelin bootleg? And if you saw one, you just wow. And not all of them made it through the flood, but their quality that you find of those early ones really suspect. It's just the cool factor.
It is, because you've got something. We talked about this from the collecting standpoint. I've got something that hardly anybody in the world, nobody else really has. But also, B, it's a picture, as I mentioned, of a point in history where nobody else knows about this. Maybe you were at a show for some people there, or they were that era of a show, and they remember that, or just the fact that this was such a cool performance of theirs at this time, that I've got this. And I know that there's been some official releases. I think the Allman Brothers, for example, have been good at doing this too. But there was even a Record Store Day release several years back, but it was just a terrible audio quality. But they billed it as this was a rare performance, one of the last performances of this incarnation of the group to exist. And hey, sorry if we've got this bad audio quality, but that's how it rolls.
I remember, they had that warning on there.
People the audio's not good.
What's with the recording on this? And it is that moment in time, and you hear the band with their mistakes. It hasn't been airbrushed or anything. This is what they really sounded like.
Well, and you hear it from that audience perspective in some cases too. Now, from an audiophile standpoint, that's the worst thing in the world, but that's, I never got a chance to see Led Zeppelin. So perhaps this is what it was like in that crowd and hearing that at the time.
Yeah.
Can you remember it? Now on your show, you mentioned, gee, I wonder if Jim has any Rush bootlegs. I do. I've got too many to show. We won't go too far into it, but these
Wow.
are some of they started getting a little slicker as you get into the early 2000s. This was a 2004 release, made to look like 2112. It's going to be a little misleading, but this is the legendary broadcast. We're getting into that again of the 2112 in concert, and this was broadcast live from the Kiel Auditorium in February of 1980. So it's 2112. It's in its entirety, and then a couple of other songs on there as well. And one of my favorite Rush concert bootlegs is this one called Spirit of the Airwaves. And this thing, it's been reissued. I actually carry copies of this in the store. They still repress this. This was a 1980 Missouri radio broadcast where the audio quality is just absolutely phenomenal. And it's a double LP where they again go through 2112. How many versions of 2112 live can I have here? But they get some extra stuff in there. And then, I think I've got another Rush one coming in a couple of weeks, another one. But then I've the same thing, Rush Dreaming Out Loud, Wisconsin radio broadcast from 1994. So they're kind of picking these things up here and there and, putting them out there. We talked about the copyright issues. Now, these are concerts, Wisconsin, obviously the Atlanta one I showed. These are US concerts. So you've got the European bootleggers getting a hold of these broadcasts, and maybe they're picking them up off online. The idea that you can clean up audio these days, I used to teach radio and television at the collegiate level. And with the digital tools nowadays, you can actually go into an audio file and you can clean up and remove background noise to some extent. It's not perfect, but you can do it. You can enhance some sections of this. You can separate channels and call up vocals. A lot can be done nowadays. And as we talked about with AI, you can do some things.
Yeah.
I don't think the bootleggers are going that far with these, but the idea that you can clean up some minor imperfections of background noise or maybe a amplifier hum or something like that is giving a little boost in quality to more modern concert bootlegs. And that, with the idea that the Europeans are scooting, they're scooting around some copyright issues, makes for a good thing for collectors and listeners alike at this time.
Well, how many keep coming out? You'll bring them in. I mean, again, they're coming out of Europe, and here's just something different. And
Oh, yeah.
if you love that group, like your love for Rush, it's exciting. It's a whole new thing.
It is. Now let's go on to Pink Floyd, because this is another one that, like Zeppelin, these bootlegs, they go back to the 70s.
Yeah.
And I found there are websites dedicated to help identifying Pink Floyd bootlegs, because a lot of the early ones, it's tough to, and they would get so imaginative with covers. Let me show one off here too. And this one, I had to really go back and look at my Pink Floyd history. I'm not up on as much as I need to, but this is an album, and let me cover that up right here. So we don't get in trouble. This is an album called The Abdabs, live at the Oakland Coliseum. Now, the Abdabs were and one of the earlier incarnations of Pink Floyd. One of the names that they went by was the Abdabs, or the Screaming Abdabs, which in British slang, I think, means to have high anxiety. So go figure with Sid Barrett that happening and through there. So this is a great set recorded in 1977 by the Abdabs, but it's actually a set of Pink Floyd and some of their earlier stuff. And we can go down a rabbit hole. And you want to do an hour and a half on Pink Floyd bootlegs by themselves, Steve?
You could. There's a lot, and I have a number of them too. And I mean, how many bootlegs are out there of Dark Side of the Moon being played?
A lot of them. The live versions. Well, Dark Side of the Moon. Let's call this one up here. I think that over the years that we've known each other, you have had a copy of this one.
Yeah,
I think, because I found this a while ago. This is Pink Floyd performing Dark Side of the Moon live, but I think you lost this one in the flood.
I did.
This was one of the best sounding bootlegs I have ever heard. And this was the performing live at Wembley Empire Pool. Does that sound familiar? In 1974. I think the date is wrong in this. Now, a couple of years later, this came out, and I think we got you one of these too. I've got one. It's the Dark Side of the Moon live at Wembley and November 17th, and this one says November 16th. So 2 different days, live at Empire Pool. Now, again, these are some of the best sounding bootlegs of Floyd concerts that I've ever heard.
Mhm.
So it only stands to reason that what would happen next, you say? We get an official release of that concert. And this came out last year. And we've talked about this as being, I think we did an episode on live albums, right?
We did. Yeah.
And this being one of the, now that case then means that now this is the official version of that concert. And this sounds fantastic, but this was the source material, at least 2 of those other versions that now I'm languishing. And in my collection, it's like, well, what do I do if I've got this really good sounding one here? But this has extra stuff on it too. These 2 both are double LPs where this is not.
And groups like Bob Dylan, like Neil Young, Prince, they've been taking these bootlegs and reissuing them on their label, so they're getting the money for them, cleaning them up anymore, so they do sound good, and trying to, hey, stop some of this.
Yep. Oh yeah, they're trying to, and that's, I think Floyd knew that this was one of their most bootleg ones. I need to go back to the Abdab's a great set. I meant to say, does that remind you of anything? The layout of this, not to get confusing, one of the Pink Floyd albums, a great set.
Oh yeah, a nice pair.
The compilation, a nice pair. It is actually a dig on that. Now, let's talk about. Well, let me get into this one here real quick. Obviously, Dark Side of the Moon is important, but another one that's always been important for me has been The Wall, the Pink Floyd Wall. So there are some bootlegs of that floating around out there as well, live performances. I ran across this a couple of years back, and it is just Pink Floyd and The Walls Came Down. Much like the Dark Side performance, this one is the performance of The Wall in its entirety live. And I would have to call this up. I don't even remember where this was recorded. It doesn't say on the album, true to form. You'd have to call up the info on that. And I'll do that here at some point. But one of the other things, and I would consider this not so much a bootleg as this one is a counterfeit. This is The Wall, but this is the audio from the film. So they're calling this the soundtrack to the Wall. This is the film, The Wall. And if you're really dug into that a lot, you know that the Pink Floyd album, The Wall, is not a direct representation of all of the music from the movie, The Wall. So this bootleg, this counterfeit, is a direct representation of all of the music that was in the film performed in that case. So you've got, like When the Tigers Broke Free mixed into that. I think it's an extended version of Vera in there as well. And just a couple of other things that are not included in the album itself. So, just kind of a cool little collectible. The audio is not great on it, but it's also not terrible.
Yeah. Back in the 70s, I think it went to the 80s, there was a magazine called Hot Wax with a W, Hot Wax. And it dealt specifically only with bootlegs. And so people that wanted to know more, to find them, they had, you could buy them through this, but, it was kind of a big deal, especially get that because now I can get the good stuff.
Yep. And we mentioned there's really, I think, a more recent uptick in the number of bootlegs coming out. And the new distributor that we picked up here at the store actually carries a lot of these European live. They don't carry the counterfeits, which I think that legally they don't want to get into that, but they can bring in the imported versions of the live stuff, and so we're seeing a lot of that. And this is where I would put out a word of caution to any of our listeners who are thinking, I want to start getting into bootlegs. I really love this band, and for me, it's Floyd and Rush, and I'm finding that I need to be tremendously careful because these bootleggers are now getting the European ones. Who'd have figured that these guys would be a little unscrupulous, right?
Yeah.
They're getting a little tricky in the fact that they are repackaging some of these things. Rush, this is happening a lot because if you think back to some of the bigger and more quality performances from Floyd, Rush, Zeppelin, especially those and some of the other big ones, there's a finite number of these recordings out there. Yeah. And so if you want to keep selling new versions of these 10 to 12 shows, what do? You repackage them as something else and you call it something else. So my word of advice for folks is if you're going to start digging into bootlegs, especially the more modern ones, make sure you do your research and find out where that bootleg was recorded because you may already own it.
the cramps are they're bootlegs. That happens a lot, and I've had that happen because they totally repackage. So
Oh
it
yeah.
looks like a whole different thing, and you get it and go, wait a sec, I think I got that one already. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you end up, and I there's a couple things too. I've got some Rush and I've got some early Floyd that are just repackaged. So now I've really trained myself to, and if I can't find the information on it when it was recorded, then I don't get it until I know for certain.
Yeah.
This was a recent one. I think both of us picked this up. This was the
Mhm.
Pink Floyd live in Montreux, another excellent sounding concert, 1970, and it's just got some great early Floyd on there, and the packaging is actually very cool as well. So now I'm set. I don't think I'd need another version of Montreux, and I'm on the lookout to make sure that I don't get that.
Well, see, you're showing the ones that sound good.
Oh no.
Ellen's Psychedelic Breakfast here is a Pink Floyd concert, and the audience has more of a part in it than Pink Floyd does. I think Pink Floyd, they get really quiet, and you just hear the rustling of the audience out there and the talking
Yep.
and all that. It is just like, it's like, oh come on, man. I mean, it's hard because of that.
I've got one also too, and this is I don't have the info as far as when this was recorded, but it is a Dark Side era because it's got Brain Damage, Eclipse, Us and Them, Money, and Breathe. So this is a Dark Side era one, and this is called "In Celebration of the Comet, the Coming of Cahotek."
Okay.
And like you mentioned, I mean, it's a cool album cover for crying out loud, but then nothing else to it. But the sound quality on this one is not great either, but it's still cool to have.
I bought this. So here's a Pink Floyd boot, and it really has no title on it. And I think it's blank on the back. There's that song. I bought it at a record store, Pink Floyd boot. I was pretty excited about this. The records in there, it's like a Beatles boot. Each it starts with it begins with a Beatles song, poorly recorded, and then just goes into like talking and like what Pink Floyd would do, adding in these vocal things, but it's just discussions and stuff, and then it ends with a song. It's a 2 album set, so I don't know what the hell I got here, but it's just like, oh crap, man.
Well, it looked cool, didn't it?
It did, and it shows. You can find this in Discogs as a Pink Floyd boot, but them albums, there's Beatles in there. So this was Pink Floyd's Secret Times.
Oh
It
yeah.
shows comes up as unofficial, but what's interesting is it says produced by Pink Floyd.
I think they could put just about anything they'd like on there.
Exactly, but it is unofficial. This one here sounds pretty good. It's an older one. This is a pretty good concert. Pink Floyd Berlin, 1971. Sound quality on this one is really good. This is an older boot, but maybe it was done through through a soundboard or something, because that one was really good. And I think the other ones I have. There's this one here. BBC Live.
Yep. Oh, I've got one of those too. Yep.
Yep.
And
So,
in fact, that's one of the ones that's been repackaged a couple times. I think I've got a couple different versions of that.
yeah. Yep.
Because I wasn't paying attention.
Yes,
Now,
exactly.
Now, one of the other things, we mentioned the wall. One of the other, and this is, I love this bootleg in my collection. And this is a bootleg of Pompeii. Now, not a Pink Floyd album, but this was a film that they attempted to make. They did make, rather.
Yeah.
But Pompeii, if you've never seen the film, it's on YouTube. You can find it in its entirety. And it's basically Pink Floyd playing live and recorded playing live in the ruins of the Pompeii Coliseum, but with no audience whatsoever. So the film was released, not to critical acclaim by any means, but then the bootleg albums started showing up of the audio from the film. And this one actually is pretty cool, and it is in its entirety. Now, our friend Michael Christensen had told me a while ago that he was looking for a copy of Pompeii, the bootleg. And lo and behold, that showed up in our distributor a month or two back for pre-order.
Okay.
So I put that in, and I got a couple. I got one for the store, and we had one for Michael, and we picked it up. And there was no information on it whatsoever. And it's very tough to see here, but it says radio broadcast Pink Floyd live at Pompeii. So I was a little scratching my head saying, okay, there was no radio broadcast that I know of the performance at Pompeii.
Uh,
So this was a little bit of a mystery to me. So I talked to Michael. He said, go ahead and open it up. He did pick it up, by the way, but I opened up his copy to verify what it was. And it is essentially the same audio as this double LP, but it's been rearranged.
huh.
So echoes on my version, for example, is broken up as it is in the film. They start off with echoes as the second cut in the film, part one, and then they end the film with echoes, part two. On this version of the album, they combine those two performances of echoes into one side of one LP. It's all the way straight through on there. Now, come to find out that the radio broadcast is the name of the record label. So
Oh,
you want to talk about being a little suspect there, but
mhm.
okay. So they're making you think that this is a radio broadcast. That's actually the name of the label, but this is the Pink Floyd Pompeii performance in its entirety. It's just been rearranged, and I've looked into some of the other bootleg versions of this, and there are other versions that have
Oh, wow.
rearranged the cuts. There's
Yeah.
so many versions of that out there. So this is just a brand new one. It's on red vinyl, but it's not really even an album. The back, it's just it's a sleeve, and then this is a piece of cardstock that's just sitting on top of the sleeve. So
Mhm.
again, do some research on these things, but it's still cool. And I think Michael was happy to have that because it's a performance of Pompeii, which
Yeah,
is it's cool to have on vinyl.
exactly.
So there's other bootlegs out there, Steve. We've been talking about Rush and Pink Floyd and some Zepp, but you got a ton of stuff too, don't you?
Yeah, I do. And sadly, again, most of I don't have the. I'll just have to make labels. Talking Heads was always a big one that I was looking for, and this is Gimme Heads, the bootleg. It came out in 1988 in Unofficial off Bootleg was the record label. Quality is okay. Again, a live concert. And they do a lot of their early stuff. This has demos, though. They threw a bunch of demos on here. So, really kind of different. It's okay. It's not the greatest. There was this one here. This is a 1978 live at Park West, Chicago. And you can see, again,
Talking Heads. Yep.
yeah, again, a halfway decent label on there. Pretty good sound on this thing. This one wasn't too bad. There was this. Let's see, is that part two of that one? Yep. No, here we go. This had terrible sound. A 1978 Unofficial. It's a bootleg. You can see the labels kind of wrinkled from the flood, but quality wise, not that great. But I was really trying to find Talking Heads, and it's a 2 record set, so I got 2 records of poor quality. And then I found this one. This is B-52's bootleg, and kind of a cool label. Absolutely horrendous. It sounded like I took my little Sony tape player in there, and my AAA batteries maybe were starting to wear out, or I guess that would have been D-size batteries. So, yeah, again, older boots, you never know. It was cool, but it's like, wow, that sucks.
And one of the only other ones that, other than Rush and Pink Floyd, I don't have a lot of bootleg live recordings. Those are the two that I've concentrated on. One came into the store several years ago that was just too good for me to pass up, and it's from the Police. It's a live recording of the Police. It's called Vinyl Villains. You can tell it's just cut and paste their picture onto this.
Yeah.
It's recorded at the Whiskey A Go-Go in Los Angeles in March of 1979. Not a great audio recording of the Police playing in 79, but the quality wise, but the performance itself is just absolutely outstanding. It's these guys at their punkiest. I mean,
Okay.
just before they started hitting. So they do Roxanne, and it's just a driving version of Roxanne on this. That's you can tell they were experimenting with that stuff at that time, but
Wow.
great stuff. It's really, I think, more of a punk album. But that, other than that, that's about it for my bootlegs. I may have some other unofficials. I think I've got a Stevie Ray Vaughan live somewhere in there, but
Yeah.
that's about that.
Well, I have after the flood, I got to know a guy. His name's Doc Burns. He's out of Baltimore, and
Mhm.
he belonged to a worldwide group that trades bootleg CDs. Now,
Oh,
the bootlegging CDs have now changed more into digital downloads.
yep.
But he had, and we're talking, this man had thousands, and they would be trading. I got this rare one, I'll trade for this one. He booted me boots of those. And I mean, this, I have 3 boxes of
Holy cow.
bootleg CDs. And he tried to keep it to a lot of groups I like. Velvet Underground's in here, big time. Talking Heads, Miles Davis, and it's just so many concerts. It is just crazy. Here's a Tom Petty from '77, Magic Sam's Blues Band. I mean, just bootlegs. Courtney Barnett bootleg, a newer one. Here's Velvet Underground from a gymnasium recording from '67. Tower of Power. It is amazing. Matthew Sweetenhoff, Howlin' Wolf, U2. Just hundreds and hundreds of these he sent me, and he put a note. I mean, he wrote a note. He was a doctor and his handwriting was beautiful, so that was kind of weird. But explaining each bootleg to me, what
Wow.
was going on with it, because he was so into these and wanted to share. And yeah, hundreds of these
And
CD bootlegs, and it's fascinating. Yeah, quality
I was
wise.
going to say that's it's very interesting take on that too, because unlike the newer boots that they're kicking out like this, which are a company trying to make money by skirting some copyright laws, the stuff like those bootlegs, the Grateful Dead tape trades over the
Yeah.
years, and what you got with the CDs are a passion. It's a love of music, and not so much the collecting, but music. We love this music. We want to share this rare Velvet performance that probably no one else has ever heard,
Yeah.
and you have that performance.
It is. It is a giant community that just swaps and trades. And I'll give you 2 of these performances for that one because I'm missing that one. And we would just discuss the stuff. And it was just fascinating how active it is. And again, now it's gone more to downloads. Some of these were from downloads. He put them onto
Yep.
CDs for me. He just goes, I think you're going to like this. I want you to try this. And yeah, I listen to a lot of them in my vehicle, and it's just, again, some are excellent quality. Some, well, it's what you get. Some of the early VU ones, Velvet Underground ones, are a little rough, but still, it's great because I love the Velvet Underground. So yeah,
It's cool to have. One of the things, and as we wrap up our conversation on this, we didn't really get into the ethics thereof. As a record store owner, do I want to be selling these unofficial copies? I mean, the counterfeits, as I said, I get it. I get it. That's just somebody trying to cash in. The bootlegs, the live stuff, you're getting some rare stuff. So I think I'm okay with that. But I want to share a story of this actually happened in the store probably about 2 or 3 weeks ago. We get a lot of, we'll call them looky-loos, people that come in and say, oh, a record store, this is cool. I remember record stores. They're not really going to be buying something. They're looking around. The woman was probably in her 40s or 50s, and the guy that was with her, they're buying a couple of small $2-3 albums. The entire visit, she's just smiling. She's thinking it's cool. She's jamming to the music I've got playing. Oh, I haven't seen this record in so long. The demeanor was just happy and jovial. She was having fun looking at the artwork. And then she worked her way over to the high dollar bin and pulled out. I had a Van Halen for Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, and it was labeled clearly on the front. I had a sticky note that said unofficial release. And she says, so what does this mean? What does that mean, unofficial release? Well, the gentleman that was with her tried explaining well, it's a bootleg. And I said, yeah, it's essentially meaning that this album has been out of print for so long that the fans really, it's market driven at this point. There's been no vinyl version and no affordable vinyl version of this album for so long that somebody in Europe took it upon themselves to get a hold of a good audio file copy and make a copy of this and press it on vinyl. Her demeanor switched almost instantly, and she seemed offended by the fact that that was an item that was for sale. How,
Hmm.
like, you're skirting the artists in this case. I'm like, well, Yeah, but so, I mean, it's a tough one. As a record store owner, I mean, I want to be able to get the items that people want. You
And
know,
you know, as a music collector, we you know, if we can't get, we really want to have it. And yeah, hey, I can get that on CD, but if you're collecting vinyl, you really want
yep,
this on vinyl, and it's a big deal. Yeah, and I understand her point, and there's people like that, but for instance, if you have that group. And you just want to get everything from that group. For me, like a Velvet Underground.
yep.
Well, forget the Pink Floyd. I can never get them all. But you
No.
know what I mean? I got a lot of those on CD though,
Yep.
but it's this is our opportunity to get something that is just you just feel it's just cool to have. Do you listen to it all the time? I don't, but it's
Nope.
just cool to have.
Yep. We'll go down in that case. And I'm gonna continue to carry the unofficials. The live stuff is easier to get now. And I'm more confident that the audio quality of the newer live bootlegs are up to snuff to be something that you'd want to listen to on vinyl, i.e. stuff like this, you're getting good quality audio of it. And when that makes it okay for me to get. The idea of counterfeits now, newer counterfeits, I don't think I'm totally on board. I don't think I would go out of my way to buy them. My distributors aren't going to carry stuff like that. So it'd be something that would have to come in like that Van Halen came in on a trade. But that's to me, it's a little bit different than getting something from a used copy of something from someone versus I'm getting this from a distributor who got this from a manufacturer who got and made this illegally. So
Yeah,
to me, I think that's where the line is a bit different.
I agree. Yep.
So, what do you folks think? Do you enjoy listening or gathering and collecting bootleg versions of live performances, or do you have counterfeit versions of albums in your collection? Very curious. Feel free to hit us up on our Facebook page. Just do a search for Two Guys Talking About Records, or on the YouTube side of things, you can leave some comments. We don't always get to them right away, but we do get to them, right, Steve? We try to.
We do, and let us know if you've been arrested because
Yes.
Copyright Police did find you had one. That's
I know
so cool.
it is cool. It's a tough question. Ethically, it's a gray area for me, but so much is these days, isn't it?
Yep, exactly.
Oh. Well, you folks have been listening to Two Guys Talking About Records. I think we went a little long today, Steve. Oh,
What a surprise! Well, we went
surprise.
short last week, so it balances.
We made up for it. So you folks have a great week, and we will be back again next week to talk about, what do you want to talk about next week? Records?
Yeah, why not?
All right.
We're on a roll.
Until then, we're on a spin.
Yes.
Until then, my name is Jim, and I am a record store owner. I'm on the up and up. Believe me, I am.
And I'm Steve, and I got some shady CDs.
Hold on. Somebody's banging on the door. I better go.
All right.
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, I'll see you, Jim.